So what we're going to do here, so first of all, I have Ticket Exchange. Ticket Exchange is an in-house application that we built. We use it in order to demo and train our consultants. It's a simple application, of a portal with an authentication server and a database that just allows us to uh, navigate through or look for events, for concerts, sports, etc. We can browse, we can purchase, right? We can check out. This particular ticket exchange is running in a Kubernetes environment. This Kubernetes environment is deployed in AWS public cloud. All right, so that's the information on the app. So let's go ahead and log in. Let's start with the first scenario. So I'm logging in. I'm going to log in as, say, user 15. User 15. Make sure I type the right. And so when I submit there, I'm submitting. So I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And there, I logged in, but it took a few extra seconds more than we would like it to take, right? So we saw about 5 to 6 second delay. So let's use this session of this user that logged in that took, it looks like about 5+ seconds, and let's see what happened. Let's follow through. So let me go to my Introscope, to my APM solution. Here I'm looking at my application experience analytics dashboard. This is the one that monitors all my end user experience. You can see in here that if I go into my analytics, so I can track in here, I have all the applications um, that I'm actually tracking, all the right that I'm actually tracking. I'll be able to, like, for instance, if I select all the apps, it will show me my total. I'll show me a summary of all my end users that actually uh, are hitting the applications that I'm managing. And in this particular case, I have Ticket Exchange AWS. So I'm going to select this one, and I'm only going to see all the end users' performance that are actually going against Ticket Exchange. I can take a look at, for instance, the experience, uh, my end user experience in the last 24 hours, 7 days, 30 days, or I can customize my time. At a glance, I see that I can see usage and performance. I see what were the number of total sessions in the last 24 hours, total number of GTP requests. I can even see the total page hits, okay, that have taken place. Um, Number of users in the last 24 hours, as well as the number of the users in the month of April, for instance. Um, I can obviously I can also track the geolocation of those end users where they're hitting my application from. And lastly, I have a summary of all the of any crashes that might occur, HTTP servers, latency. Obviously, I can hit this ticket exchange not just from the web, but maybe from a native mobile app. And so, and if I had an issue with a mobile app and it crashed, it would be captured as a crash. That's what it was showing there. All right. So we know that I can track all my end users regardless of the channel, the omni channel that they're coming in through, whether it be through the web, through a browser, right? So excuse me, through the web, through a mobile app, to a tablet, into my application. I can see their sessions. So let's go and investigate some of their sessions, right? So we're going to go ahead and look at all the various sessions that are being executed in Ticket Exchange. I see that this is our session, user 15, the one that we just used to log in. I can gonna go ahead and select that session so I can start looking at all the details of what happened in that particular session. So if I dive into that session, I see all the events that took place. Okay, all the various URLs that were hit and all the resources that were loaded, and so on and so forth. Very, very complete list of events. I also have in here a summary of the user, right? In this case, since he logged in, we're able to capture the user ID, user 15. We can see the browser that he's using uh, to hit the exchange, the operating system that this browser Chrome is running on. We see the channel that he's coming in from, so he's using web. I have a session time. I see the session's been going on for 3 minutes, almost 4 seconds. Sorry, 4 minutes. We see an asterisk, meaning that it has no close. The session is still active. I see the location where the user is coming from. So now let's. The other thing that I want to show is performance of the pages themselves. All right. So if I take a look at the URL pages that we hit, that the end user hit, we notice that he went to the home page. So this is us. We started the home page. We hit on the sign on form and then we sign in. Right. So if I look at my home page, um, we have the ability to show all the resources performance exactly, showing you not just only how long the page took to load, but also give you a breakdown of all the various events that took place for the page to load, right? All the images that we loaded, how long did the image take, if there was any JavaScript, and so on and so forth, as well as um, how long the actual DOM took to render the page itself once everything was loaded. I can see a summary of the most important events here, right on the top. I can see that the page load itself was almost 700 milliseconds. The DNS lookup was about 51 milliseconds. I can see the requests. Request is how long did it take from the time that the browser made a request to when it received the first byte from the server. And the DOM itself, right? How long did it take for to render the page, right? Um, this is very similar to if you guys have used Chrome or Firefox developers tool. They show a flow chart again of all the resources of all the calls. This is what we do as well. Okay. Now, good. So let's go back to the page URL. Now let's take a look at the sign-on itself. Okay. So since we're interested in this particular um, event. Now, if I take a look at this, I see that the page load indeed took 7 point something seconds to load. Just this is what we sort of experienced when we logged in. Um, and we noticed that the bulk of that time, it wasn't because of the DOM or anything that, loading images or anything like that. It was really the request that took almost 90% of the time, 90 plus percent of the time, right? So this is again, remember the request is, how long from the time that the browser sends the request out and it receives the first byte from the server. So at a glance, we can see that, this sign on, this particular URL, the bulk of the time was, for it to load. It wasn't you because of images or anything on the DOM render or anything like that. I was just really waiting for the backend to respond. So with that insight, then we're going to say, okay, well, let's go take a look to see what's going on the backend then for this particular request. So if I'll go back to my URLs, I'll go back to all my events, and then in here, right, I'll look for my sign on. Okay. And so what I want to do now is I want to go and take a look at the backend response time, right? The activities for this particular request. So I'm going to go ahead and going to click on the map, which this is going to take me to an APM isolation view. We're just going to show me, the performance of this particular request. since it's going to show it to me in context. Now, as I come in here on my APM, I see the various um, URL requests, right? I see my index, my sign-on form, my sign-on URL itself. I see that these are being handled by a web portal server, which in turn is calling an authentication service, a backend service that is an authentication service that the web portal uses in order to authenticate login users. And both of them are use a MySQL database. Now, what I really want to do is I want to be able to select the sign on and be able to see actually the request that handled this sign on request, right? I want to see the transaction on the server side that handled this sign on request. So I'll go ahead and select this. I can see I'll open this up and I see that I have one transaction trace, okay, corresponding to that sign on. If I select this particular one, now I'm in the business transaction view and I see the three swim lanes on top. Right? So the first swim lane, as you can see, the business segment with sign on uh, with sign on URL. This is actually a representation of how long the page, the browser page took to load. In here, it shows me that the page itself took to load 7.1 something seconds. Okay, the second swim lane is actually the representation of how long the web portal took to handle that request. Right. So when the browser came into the portal, we were able to capture that transaction trace, okay, that interaction of that request, and showed it in the web portal. But in addition, right, the web portal itself, turn around and call the authentication service, right, in order to authenticate the server. And again, we're able to capture that particular transaction on the authentication server that handled that request. So now then I can see that. Browser calls into my portal calls into my authentication service, and I see my authentication service it's probably taking the 90+% of the entire time. Okay, so I can see that the authentication server itself is responsible for 6.8 seconds out of the 7.1 second, right, that my end user experienced. So it makes sense to start looking at the authentication server and see all the activities. Now, if I expand this, I'm looking at all the interactions of my components and my authentication server. I can see that a request came in, it was handled by a servlet, then itself made a couple of calls, and then it made a web services call itself. It looks like it's making a web services call to get authentication service. So actually, no. So we see that it came and made we see that the servlet came, and it actually it's a web services code that is coming in. Okay, we received a web services incoming call, and and we're handling the request. The request that the web call get authentication account. And if I select this particular one, okay, I can see that from here then, all right, on my authentication service, this particular component looks like it's making a lot of calls to other components, right? Invocations, if you will, right? This code bar pattern that I see is an indication of all the calls of various calls that seem to be invocation that seems to be taking place. Now, if I wanted to look in details exactly what's going on with this particular component, I'll expand the other way, and I can see that this particular web services component that got called into, right, that is handling the request, it's actually, it's responsible for 99.99% of the entire request of the authentication server, right? Okay. And we also see that it itself turns around and makes it about 1123 invocation calls. Okay, so we're onto something here, right? So now the other thing that I want to do is I'm interested obviously in what are these calls, right? So I can, I can even walk through um, the path call over here, or just select a few of the components. I can see there seem to be SQL calls, right? So I walk through, right? Uh, whole backend. So they're all SQL database calls that are being made. Okay, so this is good, but in addition to just to identifying the component that we're actually calling especially on a database, I can Interscope APM can help us identify the actual SQL calls that were made. Right. So not only am I identifying, yeah, indeed, you're calling the database, but here's the SQL calls that you're making to the database, right? In case I needed to troubleshoot or do something about them. Okay. So now, when I look at this scenario again, um, I have a better insight of why the actual sign on took 7 seconds. All right. We noticed that 6.8 seconds were actually spent on the authentication server itself. Right. So I don't have to bother with the browser. There's nothing there. There's nothing going on with the portal itself. Right. It's something at the authentication service that I need to concentrate. And when I dive into the authentication service, I see that there wasn't a particular call per se that took a bulk of the time, but it was the submission of all these invocations, 1100 invocation to the database, right? That even though they were pretty fast, they add up, and it caused a 6.8 delay. So at this point, if I wanted to understand and do something about troubleshoot the response time of my uh, login session, I will look into this, right? Start looking at why am I we making 1100 calls for this particular user. Okay, so this is scenario one, how we're able to track an end user session all the way to the back end so that we can identify any performance issues.